Hey everyone, Josh Ring here. Hope you're having a great day. I'm here to help you understand a little bit more about music theory and how music gets put together so that you can in turn create better music and share your gifts with others. Today I have a fun experiment for us. I wanted to see if we could find all of the chords that exist in C major using all sorts of various diatonic and chromatic chords at our disposal. And before we jump in, I have a free guide for you. This is my music theory survival guide. I think you'll find it really useful. Just go to joshring.com/free. And in this music theory survival guide, we'll have a lot of things we're going to talk about today and a whole lot more. I think you'll find it really useful. It's my free gift for you for just tuning in and checking out this video with me. So let's jump in. Here I have some nice columns for the 12 chromatic pitches. We're going to try and see if we can find a chord based on all of those 12 chromatic notes. And we have some nice rows for the 5 main types of 7th chords we have at our disposal. So of course the major 7 I think of as 1, 3, 5, 7 in any key. And I have some various ways that it might be expressed, such as like a D, the triangle 7, or the D MAJ 7, or sometimes the D with like a capital M 7. And I'll be honest, I don't like the capital M7 as much. Sometimes based on the font, it gets easily confused with the minor 7. So I personally like the first two the most. We have the dominant 7, so we were lowering the 7th compared to the major 7, and usually that's just like a D with a 7 after it, for example. Then the minor 7th, so like a minor triad, so 1, flat 3, 5, and we're also lowering the 7th as well. Some common ways like with the M7 or the little like minus sign 7, those are actually my two favorites. And then sometimes you will see the MIN spelled out. I think that gets a little long if you have a lot of chord changes in a row. So again, I like the first two the most there. The half diminished 7, so we're kind of taking like that minor 7, we're lowering the 5th also. So sometimes you see the like degree sign with a slash through it, the circle with a slash for the half diminished 7. But personally, I really like the minor 7 flat 5 the most because it really functions often more like a minor 7th chord. And to me, it's a little easier because there's so many diminished chords to keep track of, but thinking of like a minor 7th with a lowered 5th, I think is a little easier to visualize in my brain myself. And of course, the fully diminished 7, right? So here we have one with a lowered 3rd, a lowered 5th, and a double lowered 7. So enharmonically, it is the same as the 6th. And so usually you just see that written with the little circle 7. Sometimes you might see like DIM 7. Again, I think that gets a little long-winded. I like the little circle the most. So let's go through and see how we could fill out this chart. So first, just the diatonic chords. Again, this just means the chords that naturally belong to the given key. So here with C major, with all natural notes, no sharps or flats for the key signature, that means we can build triads and 7th chords off of them, right? So here going through, right, we'd have a major 1, the D minor is 2, E minor is 3, the major 7 for the 4, the G dominant 7, right, for the 5, the 6 minor, and the 7 half diminished, or the 7 minus 7 flat 5. For this, I'm doing the circle with the slash because it fills up a lot of space when you have the M7 flat 5 after it. So again, all of these you could take off the 7th. That's why I have the 7s in different colors, because you could just use them as triads, as 3-note chords, and that would work just as well. So we have quite a few options. So when we go to our chart here, in blue here, I now have all of the diatonic chords, right? All of these chords are just the white notes on the piano, for instance. So next, let's look at what I call secondary dominants, but you might also run into names such as the applied dominants or the auxiliary dominants, right? So a few names that you could exist for the secondary dominants. So here with these, the secondary dominants is when we take a major or a minor chord that exists naturally in the key. So here I have all 6 of them. I'm leaving off the 7th because that's half diminished. And so I take all of these diatonic chords that are major or minor at the heart of the chord, and I can build the 5th of that chord, right? So I could have like the 5 of 2, or the common one being like the 5 of 5. And so now I have these chords I can add, and you can see we're starting to add accidentals. I have quite a few sharps, I have one flat, and most of them you could leave off the 7th and it wouldn't change anything. The one exception is the C7. That's why I didn't put the B flat in orange, for instance. To me, that you need the 7th on the C7 to actually make it the 5 of 4, 5, 7 of 4, because otherwise, if you leave that off, it's just the one chord. So that's important to keep there. Some people do just label them as like instead of 5 of 2, they put like the capital 6, 7. So the 6 dominant 7, the 7 dominant 7. You might see that. Personally, I like the 5 of something. It reminds me where it's coming from, how it's functioning with that. So we can add those in orange as well. So we're starting to fill it out with some notes outside of the just all the natural notes. Closely related to that are the secondary diminished chords, or you might see them called the secondary leading tone chords, or the auxiliary diminished chords, or sometimes even the passing diminished chords, a few names I've run across. So with these secondary diminished chords, same kind of thing. We're going to take our 6 diatonic major or minor based chords, and we're going to now build the 7 of that chord. And so most of them we could, or all of them I should say, we could build the 7 as a fully diminished chord. The exception is when we go to a major chord, such as the F as the 4 or the G as the 5, we could make it a half diminished, so I'm including it here as half diminished, but we could easily make those fully diminished as well. The reason being is that if we are in, say, F major, we would have the notes E, G, B flat, and D. Right, so that's why we could have a half diminished 7 going to F, but we could easily have the D flats to make it an E fully diminished 7 as well. That would work just fine. So personally, I like the 7 of something, but you could easily, label them as like the sharp 1 diminished 7 or the sharp 4 diminished 7 as another common one. As that's kind of more the passing diminished 7. So the 1 going to a sharp 1 diminished to the 2, for instance. So we can add these up there, and I have in orange, since they're very closely related to the dominant 7s, and I have the fully diminished or the half diminished if we're going to the F or the G. So next, this is actually one of my personal favorites, is the mode mixture, sometimes called modal interchange or even borrowed chords. The idea with these is that you are borrowing, changing mode. While you're in the major key, you can borrow freely from the minor key, right? So here we have all of the chords that exist naturally in C minor. And this is 100% natural minor, so we can borrow like the 5 minor. I do have here at the end the B fully diminished 7 as a very common one you could encounter as well. So you can see all of these are adding the E flats, the A flats, and the B flats. So in other words, the flat 3rd, flat 6, and flat 7 that make a key minor. So all of these can be borrowed. The Roman numerals are basically the same that you would encounter if you were already in, say, C minor. The big distinction, of course, is that I like to put the flat in front of the 3, the 6, or the 7 to remind me that the roots of that chord has been lowered. So like normally the 3 chord in C, again being E minor, now with the flat 3 major 7, it's reminding me, we've lowered it, so now we have an E flat major 7. I didn't include it here either, but you could easily just include one of the flats. If for some of the chords that have 2 flats, you could easily just do one of the flats. So for instance, with a 1 minor 7, you could also have like a 1 minor major 7. I'm not including that on the grid, but that is a possible chord to have a minor triad with a major 7. So it would be C, E flat, G, and a B natural. So you could also do the same thing with like a 4 minor major 7. I also didn't include this, but you could have like, say, a B flat major 7. So I'm actually going to put that on the graph as well. You could have a B flat major 7 with having the A natural from C major and borrowing the B flat from C minor. All right, so here we have in green some mode mixture chords. Closely related to all of these minor chords is the Neapolitan. And the Neapolitan is just a fancy name for saying a chord based on the flat 2. So it would be here the flat 2 major 7. This actually comes from like the Phrygian mode of having a flat 2 note in it. So the D flat comes from Phrygian, if you know your modes. Or in classical music, sometimes it's labeled with just an N for Neapolitan. In classical music, often it's coming into play in a minor key, so that's why I have the key signature here for, say, C minor, and as an N6, so the Neapolitan 6th, you might have heard, right? And you can see why it's really easy to use in minor, because you just have one chromatic note, as the D flat work because the A flat's already there in minor. But we can easily use it in major keys as well, with or without the 7. So another common chord. So here we have the Neapolitan, closely related to mode mixture. So since we have a plethora of new major and minor based chords, it only stands to reason that we could easily have secondaries of those chords. So here in this kind of reddish hue, I have all of the kind of secondaries of our mode mixture. And this is kind of starting to get a little bit of a stretch. It's almost like your third cousin twice removed. I mean, you're kind of related. Some of them you could really use effectively, such as the E flat 7 wanting to go to like an A flat major 7, right? That makes good sense. I don't know how often I've seen like a 7 of a Neapolitan, but I guess it could work, so I'm just going to include it here anyway. Which brings us to what I think is the more common use of a C diminished 7 is the common tone diminished 7. And here I have spelled it enharmonically to make a little more sense with the voice leading. So this middle chord we would call the common tone diminished 7. Then we get the name common tone because it has the C common tone with the notes on chords on the outside. So the C chord to a C chord, you have a C as the kind of the root of the chord. And so that middle like G from the C chord would be going to the F sharp and then back to a G when you get to the C chord. Same kind of thing. The top note here, the E going to a D sharp and then back to an E, and then that C in the middle going to like an A and then back to a C. So it makes good sense with voice leading. And with these, I should have mentioned earlier, the enharmonic spelling, it's okay to change the enharmonic spelling a little bit because then the voice leading's a little more clear. You can easily have these common tones on any note. For now, I'm just going to include it as on the C note. That's where it's, I think, most commonly used, but you could easily have it on any, and I think it would get a little convoluted with our graph to include it literally everywhere. So next, we have augmented sixth chords. This, in a nutshell, the interval of A flat to F sharp at the beginning here. This A flat to F sharp is an augmented sixth interval. And we can spell chords based on them. And in classical music, this happens a lot. It's almost like combining mode mixture and secondary, right? So like a 5 of 5 would have that F sharp, for instance, going to a G, which is how the augmented sixths resolve. They like to go to the 5 of a given key often. And the A flat is kind of a little bit of mode mixture, right? And the A flat would go down a half step to G. So that augmented sixth interval would go out, the F sharp would go up to G, the A flat will go down to G. And so you could use these. And so we have these Italian as the first one, we have the French as the middle one, and the German based on what we're adding to the mix, right? But all of it really boils down to is that enharmonically, they're the same as an A flat 7. It's just, is there no fifth for the Italian? Is it kind of like a flat 5 enharmonically, or maybe sharp 4 if you want to think of it that way? Or just a complete kind of a flat 7 as the German. And so I'm going to include the German here on our chart as the A flat 7. And again, it likes to resolve down by half step to a G chord. And jazz actually takes this a step further with what's known as tritone substitution. So here in the first measure, I have a C to an F sharp or a G flat, right? So these are enharmonic tritones. You want to spell it as an F sharp or as a G flat. And so with that, I have here in the middle here a D7 going to a G7, or a 5 of 5 going to a 5. And this D7 has the F sharp and a C. So it has that tritone in that particular dominant 7th chord. But here over at the end, on the right, I have an A flat 7 that now instead of a C and an F sharp, it has a C and a G flat. So in this kind of purpley hue, right? So now this is an A flat 7. So I sometimes call the sub 5/7, so a tritone sub of the regular 5/7, or maybe you just call it the flat 6/7. I've seen it labeled both ways. All right, and so this is really a close cousin to those augmented sixth chords. Again, that idea of a dominant 7th chord resolving down by a half step. And so we could really do this with any note or dominant 7th that we already have. So here I have another tritone of F to either a B or F to technically a C flat. So here we have our typical 2-5-1, right? And so this G7 has the F to the B tritone, but I could easily do it to a D minor 7, D flat 7 to a C major 7. So here I have the F to now technically a C flat, right? And so you can see this works really well. Just the roots of each chord is going down by half step. This is a really common replacement for the typical 2-5-1. So you could call it the sub 5/7 or the sub 5/7 of 1, or maybe just call it the flat 2 dominant 7. And you can also see the G7 compared to the D flat 7. Those are also tritones away, right? So the G to a D flat is another tritone. So you can see that the roots of these chords are actually tritones apart as well. So we can do that really with any dominant 7th, right? Replace it with a tritone substitute. So here we have a lot more dominant 7ths at our disposal. Some being more common than others, but they're all possible. So let's include them all. So related to that is the related to. So here I have F sharp minor 7 flat 5 to a B7 E minor 7. And in the key of E minor, this would be the typical 2-5-1, right? Very common progression. But in the key of C, we would have a 5/7 of 3 to a 3 for the B7 E minor 7. So this F sharp half diminished 7 is like the related 2 of the B7. And there's various ways to label that, but the idea of it's the 2 of the B7. All right, so this is an example of the F sharp half diminished 7. We kind of labeled it as a possible 7 of 5, right? Wanting to go up a half step to G. But here in this instance, it makes really good sense to be the 2 going to the B7 before going to E minor. So we can do this really with any dominant 7th we would put in the related 2. So here I have that typical tritone sub, or the flat 2 going to 1. I could have the 2 of that. So here all of a sudden I can have an A flat minor 7 that's a little more distant related to C, but it makes great sense to then resolve to the D flat 7 and the C7. So I can have the related 2. So I might as well include all of those. And again, this is really getting into the third cousin twice removed kind of thing of, some of these make great sense. Some of them are not as common, but I challenge you, see if you can find a good use for these, or see if you can find a good example of them in the songs that you play. Last, I want to talk briefly about, well, what about augmented chords? We study the 4 main types of triads that we usually study are the major, the minor, the diminished, and the augmented. So why do we make such a big fuss if they don't really naturally occur in most keys? So here I have on the left a G to a G augmented to a C. So a pretty common progression. And this is an example of the augmented chord being used as a 5, right? You can kind of see this nice voice leading on top, the D going to a D sharp, going to an E. And this is actually how most augmented chords get used, is some type of 5 or some type of just voice leading progression. So here I have on the left a C to a C augmented to the F minor. And here, this to me is almost functioning more like the 5 of 4, right? Having that raised G sharp wanting to go up to the A. So a pretty common progression. I think the F minor would likely go back to a C, and you could repeat that progression. So try it out, see what you think. So usually, again, the augmented chords functioning more like 5 than anything. So when we go back to our chart here, right, we could really, anything that's functioning like a 5, we could easily make augmented. Even if there's a 7th, we could have like a G7 sharp 5. Right? So we could always include the 7th on augmented chords as well. So there you go. Some of these make great, perfect sense, very closely related to C major. Some of them get farther and farther removed, but all of them, do make good sense, and they all relate back to our home of C major. So there you go. I hope that was helpful. Just a fun experiment to see how do chords relate to each other. How do we find a way back to C major? And I should say they aren't every possible chord. There's still some more out there. For example, I didn't include extended harmony. So for example, 9th, 11th, and 13th chords I didn't include on this because that would get a really long list. I didn't include suspended chords, so it's like a C sus4 or something, or maybe a G sus4 might be more common in C major. Didn't include like descending passing diminished 7ths, so that's another common thing. Like you might see a flat 3 diminished 7ths, or like an E flat diminished 7 resolving to D minor. That's another common thing you might see. And I did include a few examples of like the minor major 7, so another possible use of chords that we didn't fully discuss. So again, please go to my website, joshring.com/free, for your free music theory survival guide. Thanks again for tuning in. If you have questions on any of these chords, right, I didn't have time to really dive in to a lot of them just because the video would end up being pretty long. But if you have questions on all of them, please let me know in the comments. I'm happy to make more videos explaining some of these more advanced topics. So that's it for today. Again, joshring.com/free. Have a great day.